All right. Well, Cole, take it away.
Well, hi everyone. Again, happy Saturday. Welcome back. Ruth is right. We have a super fun class planned for you, and it's been one like personally in the making for months and months and months. I have been on the hunt for soft shell crab since I have moved to DC. And coming from Nebraska, I'm sort of new to like the whole like real crab experience. And the second I had it, I knew that I needed to practice it and perfect it and share it as quick as I can. But it turns out it's a pricey little menu dish, and it can like run anywhere, and it's also difficult to find. And so I have found today's menu mainly at Wegmans. This isn't like sponsored or anything, but I found that they have soft shell crab that comes frozen in their seafood section, and I've been experimenting with it all week. And I think I found the right recipe. It's rather simple and it's not terribly expensive, turns out. It's like $11 for 4 crabs, and I think that's pretty good. So we're making fried soft shell crab. I'm really excited. And to accompany that, we are also making Thai red curry. And Thai curries are a personal favorite of mine, and I really crave them during cold weather. And now that winter is approaching, I wanted to do something that was really hearty and warming, and I feel like those two complement each other really well. And so that's what our menu items are today. Some housekeeping things that are going on in the kitchen before we get started. My oven is preheated to 375 degrees. We are baking a chunk of our veggies that are going into the Thai curry instead of cooking them in the curry itself. And I'll tell you why that is in just a little bit. I also have 2 pots on my stove right now. I have my largest pot and my smallest pot, and we're going to be using those. The small one's going to be used to fry the soft shell crab, and the big one is to make our curry. If you're new to the class, welcome. This is a class that happens once every 2 weeks on Saturdays at noon. So the next one is in the next 2 weeks on Saturday. We also have a camera right up here so that you can see how I'm prepping our ingredients, and you can pin that too if you'd like to kind of see in more detail on your screen what I'm doing. And I think that's it. So, oh, and the last thing is if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the comments. Ruth will relay them to me and I'll try my best to answer those in real time. I love questions, so if you have them, send them my way. So the first things first is we have to make an aromatic oil to go into our Thai red curry. And if that word sounds familiar, it's because we also did it in our ramen class however many months ago. And an aromatic oil is something that a lot of times you see on the tops of curries where it's sort of that glossy substance that has a lot of flavor. And the main flavor in this aromatic oil is going to be ginger. And so we want to draw that out as much as possible. So what I have going on in my pot right here, I'm going to turn up my burner to just under medium heat. And I have in here 4 tablespoons of coconut oil. And one of the main flavors in Thai red curry is coconut. So we're using coconut milk, and I thought, well, why not use coconut oil? It's a high heat oil that has a high smoke point, which means you can get the oil pretty darn hot before it goes volatile and starts smoking. But medium heat is going to be safe and fine. So to draw out the most ginger flavor, we're going to need a ginger root. And so I'll show you on camera here. I just peeled it off the skin of the ginger with a knife. And I really like ginger. And so in the recipe that was sent out, I believe it said about 2 inches of ginger. This is probably more like 2.5. And so what I'm going to do is just slice this up, and we're going to put it in to our oil. Now, one of the main ways to draw out the flavor is to have lots of surface area of the ginger be exposed in that hot oil. And so what I'm trying to do here is go for relatively thin slices of ginger so that there is just a ton of it going into the hot oil itself.
Hey, Cole.
Yeah.
I think we have a question. Carol, did you have your hand raised? All right. I thought I saw hand raised. Oh, nope, must have been a mistake. Keep going. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah. So again, I'm just trying to create as much surface area of ginger as possible into this hot oil. And what you can do, what some recipes call for, is to make a ginger paste. And so what you could do is mince the ginger, or sometimes, I think I showed it actually in the ramen class, but there's this little metal tool that I actually don't know where I have right now, otherwise I'd show you, that has these nubs on it, and it grates the ginger. One thing I've learned is that if you do that with a microplane or a zester, ginger is a really tough fibrous root. And so a lot of times that can damage your zester depending on how fine it is or how strong the material of the metal is. If it's something like aluminum, it's probably not going to be strong enough. You want something that's most likely steel. And so for this recipe, I think it's just simpler just to make fairly thin slices of ginger and call it good. So the sound that I'm trying to listen for is just a light sizzling. Really, we're just sauteing this. And the longer you're able to let your ginger hang out in the oil, the more that flavor is going to draw out into it. And so in the recipe that will be sent out after the class, I believe I say in there to let it saute anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes. So a good chunk of time. The ginger will change color a little bit. It will go kind of translucent, but if you have it too hot, you may actually like crisp it up. And we're trying to avoid that. So if you see it turning brown or browning, that's probably something that you want to adjust. So just turn down your heat, maybe even take it off the burner for a little bit. Because whenever you cook with oil or fat, that temperature has a tendency to sort of last and hang on. So just because you turn it down doesn't necessarily mean that it's not still really, really hot. It takes a while for oil to cool down. So as that's sauteing, you can stir it a little bit. And then the next step that we're going to do is to finely mince a shallot. And I'll show you what this looks like without the skin removed. So shallots they're a small onion basically. And I love the flavor of them. I also love the convenience because sometimes you don't want to have to cut into, like a whole onion when you know that you're only going to use like half of it. And so a shallot to me, the size I love, the flavor I'm pretty into. And so I just removed that skin from the outside, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half. And we're going for a pretty darn thin dice here. If you want larger chunks of, the shallot in there, you can go for that. But I really like the fine size of the shallot. So I'm going for something that's probably around 1/8 of an inch or so. And if you've taken class with me before, you know that I am just a stickler for practicing knife skills. And so making small cuts, I think, is just going to further grow your arsenal of knife skills. So I'm going to I cut it in one direction. I'm going to go ahead and go the opposite. Pretty happy with that. So hopefully you can see on this camera how small these are. I'll show you with the knife here.
Oh yeah, we can see them.
Perfect. So I'll shift that off to the side and do the other one too. I will say that while you're making your aromatic oil, the timing and the order that you place your herbs is important. So like I mentioned, we want ginger first in there, and we want it to saute the longest because we want that to be the most prominent flavor. And so the second main loud flavor we want in this is going to be the shallot itself. And a lot of times you'll see that combo with aromatic oils. Usually it's the loudest flavor is either ginger or lemongrass. And the next one is an onion in some capacity. So in the ramen recipe, I believe it is ginger and then what's that called? The green onion, or scallions as they're sometimes referred. And that's that one. So this one is shallot and ginger. I'm gonna check my ginger quick. I'm really happy with that. I'm gonna turn down the heat just a bit because it's sauteing, but there's a lot of bubbles. We want some bubbles, but nothing too crazy. If it's too hot, Sometimes it can like sear the ginger and that flavor won't come out. But already it's smelling like incredible. I love it. So I might just let that hang out for a second. So the next thing that we want to do is to mince our garlic. I have 4 garlic cloves here that I've taken the skin off of. And this is no different than any sort of recipe we've done in the past. Just go for fairly thin slices. Be careful with your fingers. And we're just going to give that a mince. So the order of the garlic is going to be, it's going in the aromatic oil last. And garlic already is a pretty darn loud flavor, and we don't want it to overpower the dish too much. We want the ginger and the shallot to really come forward, whereas with the garlic, we don't want it too loud or too crazy because it's such a loud component in the recipe if we were to add it like right now. And so we want to time this out appropriately where it sautés maybe honestly for like 2 minutes max. And then we're going to add in the bulk of our ingredients. So as I'm mincing this, the veggies that we're going to bake in the oven is carrot and potato. And I've already peeled the carrots and potatoes. And the kind of potato that I'm using is called a Yukon Gold. We've used them in the past. And if you remember for some of those recipes, Yukon Golds are famous for being less starchy than something like a russet potato or even a red potato. And they're more waxy instead. And the reason you want it to be more waxy than starchy is because when you go to put it into the curry with the broth and the coconut milk, if it overcooks or the broth gets too hot, what can happen is the potato can break down and then you're not really left with chunks of potato. Really, you're just sort of left with like thick curry, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for me, I want the bite of a potato. And so we want something more waxy, which is why we're using the Yukon potato. So now I think is an appropriate time to put in our diced shallot. So I'm going to do that now. My gosh, it smells so good. I love this. And so this will saute really just until the onions get translucent. I'm going to turn this down a little bit more. Give it a stir, make sure everything's coated in oil. Cool, I'm happy with that. So the next step, and you know what, I'm going to transfer this garlic here to this little bowl so that I have a more surface area to work with on my cutting board. So the next thing we're going to do is chop our potatoes and carrots. And one thing to keep in mind is the size that you want these bites to be. Now, a lot of times in curries, you'll see these rather large chunks of vegetables. I would say that's more of like the classic route. I'm not a super huge fan of that. I ideally like stuff that is fairly bite-sized, because for me, when I go in with a spoon or a fork, I don't want to have to take multiple bites of an item. I just want to have an even distribution of flavors and textures in my mouth at once. And so I'm looking for something that's relatively more in like the small, medium-sized fruit. And you also want it to be uniform in size so that when you go to bake it in the oven, it bakes evenly. If they're too different in terms of size, it's not going to bake evenly, and you just won't have as consistent of textures in your curry itself. And this is true really for anything that you're baking or prepping, especially in terms of vegetables. So the size I'm going for here is, I would say, about a 1/2 inch or so. And I cut the potato in half, and I'm just sort of eyeballing these pieces here. And these are pretty large Yukon potatoes. I think honestly, I might just do 2 instead of these 3 here. It's honestly how hearty and thick you want your curry to be. If you want quite a bit going on in the curry, you can do more. But if you don't, you can do less. So it's really up to you. Cool. So here's one. I'm just going to plop this in a bowl here. And so both our potatoes and carrots are going to go in this bowl. We're going to lightly oil them and bake them in the oven, again, at 375 for probably about 25 minutes or so. I probably should have cut this one in half too. It's pretty darn thick. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. So there's lots of other ingredients you can add to this. If you wanted to add in lemongrass, you could do that, but I probably wouldn't do it in the aromatic oil. If you've ever had lemongrass, it's a pretty intense flavor. And when you go to buy it, oftentimes it comes in these long sticks. And when you go to use it in a recipe, sort of similarly to a green onion, you pretty much use just the bottom whites of the onion, and that's, or in lemongrass, and that's where most of the flavor is. The further you go up, it's honestly more for decoration. If anything, you can use it as a garnish, but also the texture of lemongrass as you move further up the stalk from the base, it gets sort of woody and the texture is not awesome. So you can add that in there, but I would probably add it around when you go to add in the coconut milk, and you'll know when that happens here in just a bit. So now I think the shallots have sauteed for a decent amount of time because we want it less. We don't want to overpower the ginger. And so now I'm going to add in the garlic. Give it a stir. Gosh, I feel like I say this every class. I feel we need smell-o-vision. It smells so stinking good in here. The next thing we're going to do is the carrots. And these are they're fairly large carrots that I've peeled. And we're going to attempt to cut them along a biased plane. So what that means, as opposed to just doing chops this way, so you get these sort of round circles of carrot, I'm looking to add visually more to the curry itself. So one way to do that is to still sort of do these relatively small size chops, but we're going to do it at an angle along with the carrot. So if you look at this other camera here, I'm going to do fairly long slices with the carrot. And instead of just going, directly down, I'm also sort of guiding my knife partially forward and then down. And this helps to cut through the carrot. And you need a knife that's relatively sharp. Carrots are pretty darn dense and thick. Be mindful of your fingers. Cool. I'm happy with that. So you get these slices, that are fairly long, but they're also fun. So that's going to add visually some texture to the curry itself. And do the same thing with the other carrot. I think 2 carrots is pretty good here. If you really like carrots, you can add more. And also carrots come in a variety of colors. You've probably seen at the market, purple carrots. Of course, there's the classic orange. There's also yellow carrots, and there's even white carrots. And all of these colors contain different nutrients or polyphenols and flavonoids that make the carrot have, of course, its visual representation, but also there's health benefits to it as well. And so when I was in dietetic school, one of the main tenets that they say is to eat the rainbow, which is just such a fun sentence to say in general. But one of the main reasons to that is also the more color and variety you get in your food, especially when it comes to your produce, the more health benefits you're going to have. So one way to add in just a different variety of nutrients is to change up the color of your carrots. It doesn't cost really too much more money, and really it's sort of fun. It can elevate your curry that much more. So now that our garlic and ginger and shallot have sauteed for a decent chunk of time here, what I'm going to do next is to add in all of our pastes, and there are quite a bit of pastes in here. We have red curry paste. We have peanut butter, which is sort of like a strange ingredient, but I'm a big fan of. And we also have a more Asian-inspired ingredient that's called gochujang. And I'm going to get it out of the fridge and show you which kind I use. And gochujang is a unique ingredient because it is fermented soy, which is basically a miso paste. And then to that, they add a variety of spices, but also chilies. And whenever it comes to like aged soy, there is this sort of umami component, which is like it's a really coveted flavor profile. And gochujang has like very fantastic umami with also some heat. So the kind that I got, I don't know actually how to pronounce this, but I'll just show you on this camera here. This is this brand. I always look for like the #1 in the corner. That's what I go for. And I like heat, like I like things pretty darn spicy. And the mild is plenty for me. I added in about 2 teaspoons of gochujang into here. If you like heat, you can add more. If you don't, you can add less. This isn't necessarily an ingredient that you must buy. You don't have to use this. If you just want a little bit of heat, what you can do is add in red chili flakes. It's the same flakes that you like sprinkle on top of pizzas. That will add some heat without having to like go out and buy like a special ingredient. You don't have to do this, but I find the depth of flavor, if you're very into that like I am, it's just nice to have on hand. So it's a fun little ingredient. So we have 3 tablespoons of red curry paste, 2 teaspoons of gochujang, and it's 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. And that's what's all in this little cup right here. So all of this is going to go into the oil now. And what you want to do is mix it around pretty darn well. It'll take a second for it to evenly distribute and the oil to break down a chunk of the paste. We're looking for something that is fairly homogeneous and it gets almost bubbly. And we're looking for that like sort of like frothy, bubbly look to these pastes and the aromatic oil. And when I reach that stage, I'll show you what it looks like probably on that camera over there. So I'm going to let this hang out for just a bit. But in the meantime, I need to get these veggies in the oven. I'm a little bit behind time-wise. And so I'm just using a high heat oil. I like using avocado oil. If you don't have that on hand, you can use canola. You could use grapeseed oil. It's your preference. And I'm just eyeballing it here. This is probably a tablespoon, maybe a little bit more. I'm okay with that. Give it an adequate mix. I'm going to make sure everything is coated in the oil. And the oil is one thing that contributes to even browning. If it's not coated in oil, it doesn't quite get the texture that I'm looking for. When I was first developing this recipe years ago, I believe the classic method is to just put everything into the curry at once and just to let the broth cook it. And that method is totally fine. But one thing I found is that the timing of that is a little bit tricky, that you can absolutely overcook a carrot. It can get too tender. In the same way too, that even though the Yukon Gold potato is starchy, waxy, not starchy, it still can be too tender where it just sort of like splits apart. It doesn't, sort of dissolve like a regular russet potato would, but it still is just, you can overdo it. So I find that baking it is a lot more forgiving and you can get texturally more accurately what you're looking for than if you just go to put it in the curry itself. Not to say that there's necessarily one right or one wrong. This is just a method that I personally prefer. I'm gonna give this another stir. It's a little bit hot. Cool. All right, so these veggies are going on a parchment lined baking sheet. and this is more of like a medium-sized one. I'm going to spread them out evenly on here. I don't know if it was the last class, but I'm a very strong believer in that when you go to bake veggies, that each veggie should have its own tray. And the reason I usually maintain that is because the compositions of vegetables is honestly so different. If you were to do Brussels sprouts and carrots in the same tray, those have different cooking times. They also really require different cooking temperatures. And so one will be done before the other, and those flavors often bleed in together. And the only reason I am combining carrots and these Yukon potatoes is because they are of fairly similar composition. They're pretty much neck and neck the same in terms of their density and texture. And so I'm fine with this. So we've oiled them. All I'm doing is adding salt and pepper, and I'm doing a little bit of garlic powder. If you've taken class with me before, you know that like one of my love languages is garlic, and I've said it pretty much every class, and I think I'll say it again. Really, I think you measure garlic with your heart, not a recipe. And so because I'm eating this, I really like garlic. And garlic powder won't really overpower these veggies. Or the dish. So I'm fine with it. This is going in for about 20 to 25 minutes, just until it's tender and it can be pierced easily with a fork. I'm not going to set a timer because these veggies are pretty darn forgiving. So I'm going to show you, let me get a hot pad quick, what this looks like. Give it a stir. So this is what we got going on in the pot so far. You can see that all the sauces are homogeneous and all of the things are cooked evenly. So to this, we are going to add 1 cup of a broth of your choice. I would probably stick with something like veggie or chicken around that arena. Let's turn up the heat. And I'm also going to add in 1 can of coconut milk. And there are lots of different coconut milks out there. Sometimes you'll see light coconut milk. There's just something that will say just regular coconut milk, like this one. And there's also something called coconut cream. And the difference in that is the light coconut milk has a lot of the fat removed. We don't want that. We want the regular fat of coconut milk. And also there's been some like stigma that coconut milk isn't necessarily heart healthy, that it contains a lot of saturated fat. And though it does have saturated fat, it is a kind of saturated fat that is relatively good for you. And so this is something that, especially for a recipe, that you don't want to skimp out on. Alternatively, coconut cream is just the fat of the coconut milk and none of that sort of clear liquid. And so that would be probably too much fat and too much of like so I'm getting hiccups here, the heavy cream. And so the regular coconut milk is what we're looking for. So as this is thickening up and our veggies are baking, let me just consult my recipe to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. There's quite a bit of ingredients in this one. I think we're doing pretty darn good. I'm happy with it. Oh, the bell pepper. So we need to chop this up. I'll set this lone potato off to the side. I like yellow bell peppers for this particular recipe, but really you can use whatever you want. You could do green if you want, you could do red, but the reason I like yellow bell peppers is because the curry itself is red, and I find there's nothing wrong necessarily with green bell peppers, but flavor-wise, I'm not a huge fan of them. And what's a little fun fact about bell peppers is the colors, did you know, are just the aging stages of a bell pepper. So a young bell pepper will start off as green, and as it ages and ripens, it will turn yellow. And then from there, it will turn red, which I think is just mind-blowing. That I, for the longest time, have always thought that they were different kinds of peppers. Not the case. It's just the aging process, which is so cool. I love that. Another thing too that I learned about bell peppers is that the number of sides it has, whether it's 3 or 4, dictates the gender of the pepper, which is bizarre to me. I'm blanking right now. What is what? I think if someone knows, I'd love for you to type it into the comments. But I'm pretty sure the longer 3-sided ones are male and the 4-sided ones are female. I could be wrong, but if you find that out, let me know. So how I'm prepping this is, again, I'm going for consistent bite-sized pieces of my veggies. Since this is mainly a veggie curry, I want those to be as perfect as possible. So I'm just slicing these about a little bit less than a half inch thick. And now that I think about it, they're more of like a 1/4 inch thick. And I'm cutting them into just these single bites here. In classic curries, they do really large chunks, like I mentioned. I'm just not a fan of that. It's not fun to eat with a fork or a spoon. And so I think this is a little bit more appealing, especially if you're making this for loved ones and guests. So I'm going to do this with the whole bell pepper. And you just need one. If you really like bell pepper, you could do all of them. You know, you could do the green and the red, but I think the yellow adds a nice contrast to the red color of the curry itself. And one of the reasons I'm not putting this in the oven is that when you do that, you get more of like a fajita texture. And I love fajita. I'm a big lover of that. But we don't want these to kind of go limp, even though there's lots of flavor and even caramelization that can come from that. We want there to sort of be a little bit of bite to it. So I find that if you cook these in the curry itself, it's a lot more appealing than if you were to put it in the oven. So these are going in. Give it a stir. And you have to stir it fairly frequently to work all of those liquids and break down even further all the paste that we have, the gochujang, the red curry paste, and the peanut butter. Peanut butter is pretty darn thick too. So when you go to cook it in the oil, that helps it sort of get more liquidy and less dense. And then it takes just a little bit of stirring here. So this is something that you want to regularly stir. And also the benefit of that is, I guess everyone has their own preference, but I personally love curries that are more on the thick side and less the soupy side. Because I like to have, so like when I go to spoon it onto something like jasmine rice, I want it to be really creamy and hearty and less sort of just kind of wash through the rice itself. I was gonna potentially do like how to show you how to make jasmine rice. And I feel like I've done that in the class. I'm just spacing which one. And if you have questions about that, how to make like really good jasmine rice, we can talk about that after the class. But I've just made some in advance for when I was perfecting this week that I'm gonna show you how we're gonna plate it and do the crab too. So
I do have a few questions if you're ready, or we can take them at the end.
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first of all, male bell peppers are said to have 3 lobes, while females are believed to have 4.
Interesting. So cool.
Mhm. And then we also had some about your cutting board preferences, as well as how you store ginger long term. I'm wondering if this person has the same problem as me. Is my ginger, I always buy a bunch and then I use it and then it goes moldy before I use it again.
Yeah. So I'll probably do the ginger one first. So ginger without this is just a small little nub. It still has that skin on it and stuff. And I really only buy ginger when I know I'm going to use it. So I'll plan out my recipes for the week kind of around the flavors that I want to use. But you're right, if you store it in the fridge, especially in like a crisper or like a plastic bag, it has a tendency to go moldy, which is such a drag. And what I found is you don't actually need to store it in the fridge. If you do that, you can just let it hang out in the open with like your onions and your garlic, and it's fine. When there's excess moisture around it, that's what helps sort of promote that moldy sort of deterioration where it gets kind of limp. But because it's so like starchy, almost woody and dense, it can hang out on here for about a week or two, and it will stay good. And so I would say the first step is probably just like let it hang out on your countertop, and you're solid. You can do it in the fridge, but I've had that same problem where it just sort of, it doesn't last as long. So I just let it hang out on the counter and it's good. I'm curious if the cutting board question came from, I spoke with a woman in actually one of my live classes that we did at the library. And I think the main concern with a cutting board like this is that if you have like a really sharp knife, it gets these, there's concern that there's little pieces of plastic that potentially can go into your food where there's microplastics. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. The one benefit to this is that it's really easy to wash, and that I believe, it's not going to trap something like microbes or, any sort of bacteria. You can sanitize it, put it in the wash, and you're good. If you're concerned about that, and I've actually been meaning to get it, I just haven't done it. You can use like a bamboo cutting board, which is also naturally antimicrobial. And the only downside is you're not supposed to do any sort of wood cutting boards in the dishwasher. You have to hand wash them, which is fine, right? I oftentimes just hand wash these. So it's been something I've been meaning to do, and I love the reminder, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But for now, I'm just using this one. So all really good questions. Were there any more that were coming in?
So I think about the cutting board. How many cutting boards do you usually use? I think I remember you always keep ones for meat and veggies from previous recipes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have two, and it's just two of the same thing. I got them as gifts when I went into college. But I mean, you can get cutting boards pretty darn cheap. Like even if you go to something like a Home Goods or a TJ Maxx, they often have like high quality cutting boards that, are, discounted for one reason or another. I'm not sure why. And so maybe I'll make a special stop today to go and do that, because there's lots of fun options out there. So if I am not using something like this, bamboo is my go-to. But yes, ideally you have two cutting boards on hand, one for your meat or your fish, whatever it is you're cooking, so there's not cross-contamination between that and your produce. And when you go to, if you work in like a kitchen or you work with chefs at all, a part of my culinary experience is I had to work in the kitchen for like crazy hours every day. But each color of cutting board is designated to like either poultry or red meat or fish or produce. And they're very diligent about making sure that they're sanitized. And that also, I think, is just like a really good policy in general to have for yourself. If you're like a really big cook, I think that's good protocol to have. So yeah, all fantastic questions. I love that. I'm trying to think. Okay, so what's next is I'm going to turn this down a little bit because our sauce, let me show you this color and the thickness quick of the curry. I'm going to set this here. Can you guys see that? So it's gotten this beautiful sort of orangey red color. If I let it sit, the oil will sort of come up to the top, and that's that aromatic oil. Hopefully I'm not like fogging up the screen here with all the steam. And I'm gonna lower the heat to just under low because already basically it's been boiling. And we want to drop it down to a temperature that is more appetizing. And so when we have it on low, what will happen is that steam is going to release out and the curry itself will become thicker. And that's not going to happen really any faster if the curry itself is boiling. It just needs to be hot enough to where steam comes out. But because of the coconut fat, the coconut cream in here, what will happen is sometimes you'll get sort of like this very, very, very thin skin on top that prevents the steam from coming through. And so if you're someone like me who likes thicker curries, just regularly stir it so that more steam comes out, and that's just going to gradually thicken it. And so really what will happen is we're gonna let this hang out on a lowish temperature for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. It's up to you how thick you want it, but you just wanna eyeball it. So it's thickened up a decent bit, but I like it thicker. So we're gonna let that hang out, and we're gonna get started on our soft shell crab. It's not a terribly crazy process. It's a little messy, which is a bummer, but I also think it's relatively fun. So I'm going to get out, I have a plate here of flour and a plate of panko. And also I have just quickly whisked a single egg in a small bowl. And this is what we're going to do, the stages of our soft shell crab. And let's get those out. So again, I got these at Wegmans, and I believe there's some in Virginia. I'm still sort of newish to, or getting around and knowing sort of DC grocers and stuff. But again, I found these in the frozen seafood section, and I've been looking for months and months and months. And I can't believe I found them, and they were super cheap, like $11. So all I've done here is I have thawed them from frozen in the fridge overnight, and I've given them a rinse under cold water, and I've just damped them off with a paper towel. And so these aren't like the largest soft shell crabs. They're more on the small side, which honestly I'm fine with. And I'll show you on here. Look how cute they are. What's unique about them, like I mentioned, is you can eat the entire crab, the whole thing. And this is like news to me. I've never known about this before. And what's interesting about soft shell crab is the reason that they are soft and you can eat the entire thing is normally they have a hard protective shell. And I believe that there is a season where most of this kind of crab molts and it sheds that hard shell. And it's after they shed it that these are harvested, whether they're farmed or caught in the wild, what have you. And it's that in-between phase of when they've shed their shell that if you go to catch them and consume them, you can eat the whole crab, which I think is just fantastic and super interesting. I have two things I want to mention about this before we get started. One is sometimes depending on when they're caught in that like molting stage, so they've shed that hard shell, and depending on when they're harvested or caught, what can happen is there will be a little bit of hardening on top of this like main body here. And so what you can do, I've already done it, and I probably should have just waited to show you now that I think about it. But if you take just a thin knife and slide it underneath, there's like sort of this clearish layer on top. Some people don't like texturally that bite of it. It's totally fine and perfect to eat. But sometimes the texture just throws people off. It's a little bit thinner than something like a shrimp tail. And also for the record, you can eat shrimp tails. It's just not like appetizing, right? The same is true with this. So I've just slid my knife underneath there and just removed that from this top upper piece of the crab. And now it's just this perfectly soft portion that when you go to bite into it, you're not going to be met with, when you go to fry it, you won't be met with sort of like an overly hard piece. It will go completely through, you won't notice a thing, and it's fantastic. The other thing I will mention is in the crab, there is something called the mustard. And I didn't know about this until my first attempt at these when I found them. And the mustard, when you go to bite into it, sometimes what you'll see is sort of this yellowy substance. And at first I was nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, is this like the poop? Did I need to like cut it out or like remove it? Am I gonna get sick? I Googled it very quickly and I found out that nope, it is absolutely edible. And in fact, that's where a lot of the flavor comes from in the crab. And also it's a filtering organ within the crab itself. I don't really like that word. It's not entirely appetizing, but this is like, an informative class, so I thought you should know. And it's fine to eat. There's so much good flavor there. And everything is just sort of ready to go. Sometimes what will happen too is when you go to thaw these out, the large claws will fall off. Ideally, you want to try to keep those on because there is some meat in there too that you want to get to. But if they fall off, it's fine. You can fry them separately, but like the two here have just fallen off and now it's just sort of these, little legs here. So If you have any questions, I'd love to answer those as they come up as we do this. It's a little bit messy, so we'll see if I can time this out right. So first step is to coat this little crab in an egg wash. You want to make sure, be gentle with it because those legs are finicky and they sometimes fall off, and there is some meat in there. So we're trying to dip it into the egg. And then, oh, also one thing I forgot to mention is ideally you have one wet hand that the egg goes into and one dry hand. And the dry hand is used for the dry ingredients. The wet hand is used for the wet ingredients. So I'm gonna get a paper towel quick so I can convert this to my dry hand. And so you're going to cover it first in flour pretty generously. And shake off the excess. Again, be gentle with those smaller bits. So this is going to be the main crust. And then I'm going to switch to my wet hand, dip it back into the egg mixture. Should probably be a little bit more gentle. So now we have sort of like this thick slurry of flour and egg. If there goes a leg, that's fine. And then this goes into our panko. Panko is a Japanese breadcrumb. We use it a lot in these classes. And what I love about it, it's a neutral, there's no like flavor or seasoning to it. But it's a thicker version of just regular standard breadcrumbs. And what I'm trying to do is just push it and press it into all those wet, eggy areas. Takes a little bit of time, that's fine. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna shake off this excess and just set it on here because I'm done with the cutting board. And I'm gonna do one more. Oh, dang, I should use my wet hand. I keep forgetting. So you can tell on this one, the main pinchers, hopefully they stay on, are still intact with this crab. You can see them dangling there. I think that's so funny. Cover it in flour. And the amounts here, I think I put in the recipe just a cup of each. So a cup of just regular old flour and then a cup of panko. And because I'm just doing 2 crabs, this is more than enough. The packages that these come in at Wegmans they come in packs of 4. And so I think you could still do all 4 with these ratios of flour and panko. I find though, if you use a little bit more, it's just easy to work with, even though you have lots of extra. Ideally, I'm just not trying to waste. And so this is fine. Transfer to my wet hand. Back to the egg. My favorite part of this really is the panko. So though the flour is on here, I want to make sure that everything is saturated as possible because the panko is really just such a fabulous crunch to it. Okay. To the panko. There's a leg that has fallen off. So though it's not terribly difficult, it takes a little bit of patience, a little bit of time, but the return I find is just perfect. Flip it. You really want to make sure that all areas are covered. The top side, that there's that sort of skin that we talked about removing, if you don't like that texture. There are these nooks and crannies along the legs, and if you don't get in there, it's fine, but you get such a fun experience when you get some panko in there. Okay, give it a shake. I mean, how cute and cool is that? I'm gonna rinse off my hands, 1 sec. Okay. I'll give my curry a stir. I've not done that in a little bit. You can see that no steam, well, hopefully you can see, is coming off. There's a little bit of that skin on top. That's fine. Turn it down a bit. Okay. So what I've done is I have about, I would say, a little bit less than a cup of oil in this small saucepan. The oil I'm using to fry is canola oil. It's cheap. It's not necessarily the most nutrient dense, but for something like frying, it's convenient. You could use avocado oil that's much more heart healthy. It has a high smoke point. You could do coconut oil too. It's just when you go to purchase those, they're infinitely more expensive. So it's just up to you. If you're someone who is trying to worry about their heart health and you want to be more mindful of that, maybe it's worth the switch. If you want to give this recipe a try, totally your call. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this into the oil. And when you go to place, when you're going to fry anything, you always want to place it into the oil away from you. So if this is my bowl of oil, I want to put it in, I want to submerge it into the oil so that if it splashes, it's going to splash away. It won't splash towards. So just, that's one thing to keep in mind. So I'll do the smaller one first. And then listen, can you hear the sizzle? Maybe.
I think Zoom automatically filters out background noise now.
That's smart, yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay. So the heat setting I have is just under medium. My dials are numbered, and so right at medium is 5. I have this at like 3.5-ish. The temperature of the oil ideally is 350 degrees. If you have a thermometer, you can measure that out. Another test you can do is when you go to plop in, like when the oil, you sort of, there's like a smell almost, it shouldn't be smoking at all. That's not good. It means it's too hot. But if you plop in a few of these panko breadcrumbs, they should sizzle. And that sizzling is a good sign that you're pretty much right at 350 degrees and that you're at a good temp. And these will cook pretty darn quickly. It's about 2 minutes per side or until there's sort of like a golden crust that's created. And so already I have my tongs here. I'm gonna go check them out. Needs a little bit longer. Happy with that. It smells really good. I'm gonna get out a plate. And just for presentation, I don't know if I mentioned this. I made some jasmine rice ahead of time, and so I'm just gonna put that on the plate so that the crabs have something to rest on. I just did this in a plastic bag. I'm running out of containers here. Cool. I'm fine with that. And then we have to look at our veggies. I think it's been about 25 minutes, probably closer to 30, but because they're so thick and dense, they're forgiving. Let me go check the crab. Love it. Can you hear that one? It's really sizzling.
We could hear it a little bit.
Okay.
Whenever you have a minute, I have some questions for you, Cole.
Yes, one sec. This is really bubbling. I might do them after I put the veggies that are in the oven into the curry.
Perfect.
One sec. All right, let me pull these out. They look great. So there's some slight browning on the edges. I don't know if you can see that. And I'm pretty happy with it. I'm gonna test it with a fork quick. Love it. Fabulous. Okay, so these are going to go in to the curry itself. I'm just lifting up the parchment paper and then just go ahead and dump it in. We'll shift these around a bit. So at this point, I'm going to cut the heat to the curry. It's at a temperature I want. It's at a thickness that I want. And so I'm done with it. In order to eat it, it probably needs to cool down just a bit. Discard that, and I'm gonna check the crab. Oh my gosh, that's perfect. One thing I forgot to mention is that as soon as this comes out of the frying, that you want to salt it immediately. And the reason is because the salt will adhere to it. And I also want a little bit of Old Bay. You don't have to, it's not traditional, but gosh, I am a big fan of Old Bay. And so I'll show you what this looks like quick. Let me move this over here. How cool is that? Isn't that fun? So I'm gonna do the same thing with this one. Placing it away from me. And give the curry a stir. All right, I'm ready for your questions. Thanks for being patient.
Oh yeah, no. I think, okay, so first, have you ever used gloves when cooking to easier transition from a wet hand to a dry hand if the recipe accommodates?
I haven't, but that is a genius idea. Just using disposable gloves, and then you don't have to like rinse off and worry about your hands. I love that. I haven't, but I think that is a very smart idea.
All right. And then also, could you mix the egg and flour together and then coat the crab and then panko it?
Potentially that could work. My only hesitancy is that it would probably turn into a little bit more of a pancake batter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it might be difficult to have the panko breadcrumbs adhere to it. So I would try it, and now I want to try it. But my only caution is that you want it to be pretty darn runny, runnier than a pancake batter. So you could do that and like whisk it in. I think it would be absolutely fine, so that there isn't any clumps, and that way it's most likely a more consistent batter. So I like that idea too. You guys have fantastic ideas.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
That's it. Thanks,
Okay.
Cole.
Let's check in. Crab. It's got a little bit more to do. This is a larger one. Another thing to keep in mind when frying anything in oil is that when you go to place an object that is not the same temperature as oil, for some reason, like the first thing that you do, it will like happen really quickly because all that heat is cooking and frying that thing that you're making. But when you go in with something next after that, a lot of that heat is leached out because it has just been infused and to cook or used to cook whatever it is that you're frying. And so this one will take a little bit longer than the first one, and that's absolutely natural. You just want to be mindful. Frying is like a very interesting, unique art and science. Oddly enough, you wouldn't think that it is, but like getting the perfect temperature and a consistent cook all the way through, it's a skill, truthfully. And I think when you have like a frying machine, that's easier. But because this is like the size of my kitchen, this is all the storage I have, and that's it. I don't have space for that, and I also don't really fry a whole lot, so I'm happy with just doing this. But if you're really good at frying, you can make fabulous things that are really tasty too, or you can do air frying, I suppose, as well. I'm gonna check the crab. That's pretty good. Let's flip it. All right. So I am going to plate up the curry. I'm just going to ladle it into a bowl. I have over here. And the ladle. Here we go. And give it a stir quick. So everything is cooked through. The potato, the carrot, and the bell pepper. And it's more on the thick side. Oh my gosh, this looks so good. So here's the curry. And what you can do is serve this with just a few sprinkles of cilantro. And you can chop it up. I'm not going to, also because I don't want to like dirty, because I've already contaminated my cutting board. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to rip the cilantro with my fingers. And normally I probably should have timed this out a little bit different. I would cut this lime in half, but I use the knife to touch the crab, so I'm not going to do that. So what you would do is you would just cut the cheek of a lime, and the cheek of a lime is when you go at sort of like an angle. So instead of going straight through the center here, you would go just a bit off center. So you just have this sort of small rounded area for the cheek. And you would serve it with a squeeze of lime on top. And then you have, you just take your rice and dip it into the curry, or vice versa. You can spoon your curry onto the rice, have a crunch of your soft shell crab. And my goodness, does that not sound like such a fun, and it's not necessarily a complicated meal either. But what's cool about these soft shell crabs, I think they're good for like a day or so. So if you don't want to, you want to make this for guests or loved ones, and you don't want to have to be too busy in the kitchen. Let me check this crab quick though. Make it in advance, put it in the fridge, and then just heat it up in the oven at like, I'd say 400 degrees for about 5 to 10 minutes, and you're good. This looks fantastic. I'm gonna let that cook a little bit more. Oh, I think it's fine. Yeah. Get this plate quick. Try to make sure a decent amount of that oil is off. And then, like I mentioned, try to immediately salt it. Nothing too crazy. All right, and some Old Bay. Voila, there's your meal. So Thai red curry. Oh gosh, I forgot one ingredient, and I'm surprised that someone usually spots it. In the curry itself, you want to put in 1 teaspoon of fish sauce. And it's not like similar to the gochujang, it's not absolutely like crucial, but there is a lot of umami and flavor components in there that are important. And the last thing I'll say about fish sauce is not all fish sauces are the same. They're vastly different. So similar to when you go to press olive oil out of olives, the same is true with fish sauce. I believe it's pressed from sardines. And there's different grades and qualities, and there's even like a delicacy to it. And so I found that if you really like sort of Asian cooking, a great, fantastic, top-notch brand of fish sauce is this Red Boat. That is my all-time favorite. It's like the cleanest and the most concentrated version, and you need usually less than usual recipes call for. So I think a teaspoon of this is just fine. But normally that would go in just before serving. And the timing of when you go to put in the fish sauce, which is why I forgot about it, if you do it too early in the process of making the curry, all of those flavors and aromas are going to evaporate out. And we want to keep those in. And so you would do it pretty much like a minute or two before serving, and you've got to mix it in. And that way, that's the last step of the curry. I can't believe I forgot it. But at least I told you about it. So that's good. So this is what we have: our Thai red curry, our fried soft shell crab, which I'm very proud of. And you can see how simple this was. It's a little bit messy, but that's fine. On a bed of jasmine rice. That, I would say that is a top 10 meal. I highly recommend you try it. I hope you like the class. And if you have questions, I'd love to answer those.
Wow, thanks, Cole. That looks so good.
Thank you.
I always make the mistake of not eating lunch before hosting this class. And once again, well, that was really great. I think that we had a lot of questions. So if anyone has anything else they would like to pose before we close out this program, it looks like we're just after 1. So raise your hand or quickly put it in the Q&A. I will note that I have frequently seen out by the Chesapeake Bay soft shell crabs for sale. So that might be another place to find soft shell crabs if you go out to like Chesapeake or Anne Arundel County. But let's see.
We
All
do
right.
have, oh, sorry,
Yep.
Ruth. We do have one question. The curry is hot temperature-wise. The rice is room temperature cold. The crab is hot. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, in an ideal world, the rice would be hot. You would make it alongside everything. In terms of like how I personally was planning out the class, that seemed like a lot of moving parts. And sometimes I get overly excited and I wanted to not make it too crazy. So this rice, ideally you would make it fresh and you would serve it with hot rice. I just made it before this morning, when I was prepping for the class, so that I could just focus on these two components, just the curry and just the soft shell crab. But yes, technically this rice is like slightly chilled. I wouldn't necessarily serve it with chilled rice. I would serve it with like fresh hot rice. And the kind of rice that I use is jasmine rice, which is the traditional kind of rice you would serve with something like a curry or Thai curry. If you would serve it with Indian food, and it's a totally different kind of curry in particular, the kind of rice you would use is basmati. But yes, that is a great question.
All right. Interesting. I was always wondered what the difference between those two rices were.
Yeah, the jasmine rice is a bit more starchy and it's more, I would say, not flimsy, but it's easier to mess up. Whereas a basmati rice, the grain is slightly longer, it's more pointy, and it takes just a little bit more cooking time. I really, really like basmati. I've been really trying to tweak and perfect Penang, or not a Penang curry, I'm sorry, but an Indian curry, tikka masala. Sorry, the name is just escaping me, but I haven't perfected it yet, so I'm not sharing it with you quite yet. I'm still working on it.
Ooh, well, I can't wait for that class. I love tikka masala.
I do too. I'm a big fan. My last thing I'll say before we wrap up class is the next class is going to be holiday themed, and it will be strictly desserts. So if you like desserts, that's the class for you. I'm not going to share exactly what I'm going to make because I want to keep it a surprise. I'm going to keep you on your toes. So yeah.
Ooh, well, that is exciting. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions. And if people want to come and maybe before or after class, we could also maybe share some of our holiday traditional baking items. All right. So hope to see everyone on the 18th, right? That's in yep. So yeah, thanks again, Cole. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yes, likewise. Thanks
All
everyone
right.
for attending. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.